Okay, good afternoon everyone. Thank you ever so much. If I could have your attention now, please. Actually, my name is Billy Stokes and I'm an assistant principal here at the college. Thank you so much for attending our student hustings this afternoon. We are incredibly grateful, and I know Josh will thank all the candidates for coming, especially at such a busy time for them. And we had some careful planning about today's date, but it turned out to be more fortuitous than we could have imagined. So hopefully it is a fantastic opportunity for all of you. Just a couple of brief announcements. We do have ITV here today to film parts of this event. So if you were concerned at all about perhaps being in a wider screen, if you did just sit on one of the seats at the back, then that would be good. And if there were to be an emergency, we don't think there will be, but there are two fire or emergency exits. Okay? This is very much a student event, and it has been run by a group of amazing students. So this is it for me, and I'm going to hand over to Josh, who is an Exeter College student, but also Britain's youngest ever newsreader for Radio X.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I just want to say a massive thank you for everyone for attending today. It's amazing how many people have turned out. I thought it wouldn't be as big as it is today. So yeah, this is the parliamentary hustings here for Exeter, and in a week's time, 18-year-olds and many people around the country will be able to vote in this next upcoming election. So today we get to hear from some of the candidates standing in Exeter to be the next Member of Parliament, and we'll provide you with an opportunity to share the views and answer your questions and on issues that matter to you. And as Billy said a second ago, if anyone isn't happy about being on ITV West Country, if you move to the back now, that would be great. But let's do an introduction to the candidates. So in no particular order, we've got Andrew Bell from the Green Party sat there. Andrew, say hello.
Hello everyone, that's me.
We've got Steve Race representing the Labour Party sat here.
Hello.
We've also got the Liberal Democrat Will Axel, and the Reform UK candidate for Exeter is unable to attend today, but the campaign manager for Newton Abbot, Matthew Sykes, is representing them today, and the Conservative candidate for Exeter, Tessa Tucker, is away on other duties this afternoon. So yeah, anyway, we thank all of you for being here, and if we have a round of applause for everyone for attending this event today. Thank you. I'm going to set a few guidelines for this event. So to ensure a smooth and respectful discussion, each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement, which we'll go to in a minute. And after the opening statement, we're going to go to a Q&A session. So some questions have been pre-submitted, whereas some other questions we're going to take live from the audience. So if anyone wants to think of any questions during this event, please think, and then we'll come to you in a little bit as well. Yeah, and the event will conclude with a closing statement of around 90 seconds to 2 minutes long, if that's who of you. So I think we should begin with the opening statements now from the candidates. So in no particular order again, if Andrew Bell from the Green Party wants to come up here, and 2 minutes will be on the clock as soon as he's ready.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready. Yes.
Okay, well, it's absolutely fantastic to see so many students here. It really is. I'm bowled over by the turnout. It's absolutely amazing. So I've got a particular vested interest in Exeter College because my eldest daughter attended the college, and my younger daughter is in the audience now, also at college. I won't show her up now because I'm sure she doesn't want to be shown up, but so I have a very much an interest in the college. I've also worked with sixth form students in the past, and so I know just how articulate and informed young people are. And there is absolutely no good reason why young people of 16 and 17 shouldn't be able to vote in this election. So the Green Party strongly supports your right to have a say on your future in this election. Unfortunately, that's not going to be possible unless you're 18, but we would love to change that to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. So what are the Greens offering young people? Well, we know that we are the second most popular party for those aged 18 to 30. Who knows, we might be the most popular for 16 and 17-year-olds, I'm not quite sure. But there's a very good reason why we're so popular. We've got a raft of really good policies for young people. For instance, Green MPs will push for a £3 billion increase in funding for sixth form education over the next parliamentary term, and a £12 billion investment in skills and lifelong learning for further education. We'd restore the education maintenance allowance to financially support young people to extend their studies after the age of 16. And then for higher education, we want to scrap tuition fees and reintroduce maintenance grants. On work, we'll seek to introduce a minimum wage of £15 an hour, irrespective of your age. So you don't have to reach a certain age to get £15 an hour. It would be as soon as you're 16. On travel, we want to inject 10 billion subsidy into improving trains and buses. And we want to take public control of public transport, so we, the users, get to say what routes, frequencies and prices we should be paying. And we need to end Stagecoach fleecing us for private profit. So how do we pay for all these proposals? The billions we need to invest in tackling the climate emergency, fixing our health and social care services, and ensuring we have the right homes in the right place at the right place can be done. There's been a conspiracy of silence in this election. That's not my words, that's the words of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, an economic research institute that analyses different tax and spending policies. They've been critical of our policies as well. But they have flagged that the Labour Party is not going to be able to pay for fixing our broken public services with their manifesto. The Green Party are being honest. We are not afraid to ask those with the broadest shoulders, especially the super-rich multimillionaires and billionaires, to pay a little more.
That's 3 minutes long there, thank you, Andrew. We're going to move over to Steve Race from the Labour Party for your 3-minute first speech. Thank you very much, Andrew, for that. Whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you very much. Again, it's absolutely fantastic to see you here. This is by far the second biggest audience we've had at any hustings that we've done so far. Maybe even as close as the kind of cathedral one last night, but far younger. So it's absolutely brilliant to see you. Thank you for taking the time to come and listen to us and looking forward to your questions. I just want to say a bit about why I go into politics and what drives me. There are two real reasons. First is that I grew up as a sort of gay man. I knew I was gay from a pretty early age, sort of primary school, beginning of secondary school. But when I grew up, we didn't have an equal age of consent. I didn't have the ability to have a civil partnership or get married. Section 28 was still enforced in schools, so there was no discussion about any relationships other than straight heterosexual relationships. And so I was 14 when the last Labour government came in, and that all started to change. The second reason is my sister was born, when I was 10 years old, my youngest sister was born with a genetic condition. So she was born pretty severely disabled. So she lived just 2 days shy of her 10th birthday. And she relied on the NHS, and my family relied on the NHS and on the social sort of system, social welfare system that surrounded us throughout her entire life. So she had many operations, and the specialist hospital was in Manchester. Under a Labour government, that hospital was completely rebuilt. Under a Labour government, the science around her condition massively improved because of investment in that science. And children who were born with that condition today live far better lives than they did when my sister was born. And the reason I tell you these two stories is because these sorts of things happened to me when I was just a bit younger than you, sort of 14, 16, I suppose. And it really made an impact on me that actually politics matters. Politics matters to individuals, it matters to communities, and it has a massive impact. Politics can also make people's lives better. And that's what I'm in politics for. And I think over the last 14 years, we've seen politics that doesn't really make people's lives better. So up until 2010, we removed 500,000 children from living in poverty. Since 2010, 700,000 more children live in poverty. We are living in a society which is really advanced and pretty rich, but there are too many people who don't have the opportunities and don't have don't have the ability to reach their potential. And that's absolutely the same for young people, and it's absolutely the same for Exeter as a city. There is a huge amount of potential in the city around climate change, around jobs, and all this that we can do better, but we are being let down by a Tory government. So I want to be a Labour MP, and hopefully in a Labour government that really sort of bangs the drum for Exeter and bangs the drum for young people as well. So we are also promising votes at 16, and we have the ability as a Labour Party to form a government and offer that to you. So how many people here can vote in this election? Quickly, because I've only got 3 minutes. Okay, how many of you would vote if you're above 16 and you had the vote? Great, exactly. So, you know, this is extending the franchise, making sure that as many people as possible can vote and should vote. So we really, really want that to happen in the next government.
Yes, Steve Rose, that's your 3 minutes up.
Thank you very much for that. Speaking more. Take care.
Up next with his 3-minute statement is Will Axel from the Liberal Democrats for Exeter.
Hello, yes, that's right. My name is Will Axel. I'm the Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate for Exeter, and can I also say how great it is to see just so many people here, young people, just like myself, you know, supporting democracy, which is so important. I grew up in Exeter, I live in Exeter. This is in fact the church that I came to with my family since the age of 6 to 15, I think it was. So I'm very embedded in Exeter, and I also work locally at Daily Bowl, which, you know, some of you may have visited before. Come to visit. So yeah, as a young person myself, I'm 25. I feel actively neglected, disregarded by the government, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way. But voting is our power. It's been fought for over generations. It's how we stand up for ourselves. It's how we get politicians to listen to us. And it's how we get the changes that we want. I'm proud of my party's manifesto for young people. We will open talks, you know, continue talks with the EU with the aim to get a EU youth mobility scheme, which was rejected off the bat by both the Conservatives and Labour. We've got a practical plan to restore our environment, and you know, we'll put local communities, we'll give them control over their public transport routes. And we'd also reintroduce maintenance grants, improve upskilling and fair wages for apprenticeships. We've got great policies for mental health, standing up for minorities' rights, and we're the largest party continually campaigning for political and electoral reform, and including votes at 16 as well. That will transform our politics for good to make your voice matter. At the moment, power is concentrated in the hands of very few people, influenced by money and self-interest predominantly, and I include the Conservatives and Labour in that. Why I joined the Lib Dems back in 2015, I was too young to vote at the time, so I thought, let's join a political party that most closely aligns with my views and social philosophy. And it was in particular our action on the environment that I joined the Lib Dems, because we more than tripled renewable energy in government, and we've always had very strong plans for that. And I believe climate change global heating is the biggest issue of our time because it's so large scale and accelerating. So yeah, Lib Dems want to enable everyone to fulfil their potential. I'm standing up for Exeter because I believe I can get a fair deal for the city and put pressure on others to represent us properly. And every vote for me and the Lib Dems is a vote to push the likely incoming Labour government to be more liberal, progressive and transformative. Thank you.
That was Will Axel from the Liberal Democrats speaking there. So the Reform UK candidate for Exeter, as I said before, was unable to attend this event today, but the campaign manager for Newton Abbot, Matthew Sykes, is here. You're going to do a 3-minute first speech, but he's not the candidate for Exeter, just putting that out there. But when you're ready.
Yeah, hi afternoon all. I am, as Josh said, the campaign manager for Newton Abbot. First of all, I want to dispel the myth that Reform UK are racist in any way, because I know it's something that goes around a lot on the internet. Our deputy is an Asian guy, Ben Habib. We have about 12 or so candidates who are Asian and black, and we've just had an Asian donor give us £500,000. So for a start, understand that. We are not a fascist party. Okay? We are right-wing, but we also have some centrist policies. One of which I think we'll all agree on, is the nationalisation of water, because what's happened is a disgrace. We have Thames Water polluting the river, £15 billion in debt, and when that falls, it'll be the taxpayer who pays that. Down in Newton Abbot, we have frequent sewer spills into the Team. This is an illegal act, and people are profiting from this through dividends. We're going to shut that down. We are also an anti-net zero party. Now, I know to you young people that might come as a bit of a surprise, almost a heresy these days. But we believe the impact of net zero is limited in extent and also geography. There's only certain areas that will be impacted, areas which are already marginal. And with India and China, for example, China has 270 coal-fired power stations under planning or being built. What we do is irrelevant. CO2 will go up past 500, 600 parts per million. We will get the impacts, whatever we do. It is far better to spend that money on dealing with those impacts where and when they arrive. And there's also a moral reason for that as well. So let's assume the worst case happens, that CO2 makes floods 5% worse. Do we cut CO2 and save 5 lives, or do we build flood defences and save 105? Regardless of the cause of warming, adaptation is more efficient. Now, other policies we have which affect young people, raising the basic tax threshold to £20,000 a year, which is a huge benefit to everyone. Also to promote housing. The big issue is that uncontrolled immigration is driving demand and pushing up prices, and we have restrictive planning policies in Britain. We're going to change that. It's going to make housing cheaper. The solution would be to turn Britain into a concrete housing estate, and no one wants to see that happen to this country. It's far too beautiful for them. So I'll leave you with that and say again, thank you for coming.
That was the campaign manager for Newton Abbot for Reform UK, Matthew, talking there. The Conservative candidate Tessa Tucker was unfortunately unable to attend the event today and has apologised. She sent the entire Conservative manifesto, which is 80 pages long, and I don't think I want to read 80 pages of a manifesto, but she also pointed us in the direction of pages 26 to 30. So if anyone after this event wants to look at pages 26 to 30 in the Conservative manifesto, that looks into issues that affect us younger people. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the Q&A session. I've got 2 questions here which are already pre-planned. Then I'm going to pass the microphone over to Honey, and she will be a roaming mic for anyone who wants to ask a question. So I think over the next 5 to 10 minutes or so, if anyone could think of a few questions, that would be great. But the first question to the panel then is from Ollie Harris, and he said, what policies can be put in place to help young people with affordable housing? So shall I go to the Liberal Democrat candidate, Will Axel, first to answer this question? We've got the microphone there.
Should I clip it in?
If you just hold it up in front of you, then if anyone wants to counteract.
So Exeter, the country, has a housing crisis, as we're all too painfully aware of. Rents in Exeter are very high, and they are climbing. They have no sign of slowing down particularly. So Liberal Democrats have a community-led approach to housing. That means that it will actually address community needs and what housing is needed, you know, the right houses in the right places. I think that's a really important approach, otherwise you just get very expensive, unaffordable accommodation that nobody lives in, and you can look at the Grange in Coventry Road, which has a very high vacancy rate and very expensive rents as well. I don't know who can afford that. I think you have to have a salary of over 26k even for the affordable rooms that they have. So as part of this community-led approach, we are big advocates for neighbourhood planning and community forums, citizens' assemblies, and neighbourhood planning in particular would mean that, well, yeah, it's what I've described. But another policy that is really great related to that is community land auctions, and that is where developers sell or propose pockets of land to the local council, and then the council's like, okay, we'll use that one's concordant with our local plan, and then we'll give the planning permission with these outlines, this money, affordable housing, this much insulation, solar energy, and then they offer it up on the market again. And so that really puts value uplift that developers receive in the hands of local councils and communities, and the power that comes with that. There's a lot that I could say on Labour locally and what they could do better on housing, but the main thing is the local plan and properly looking at planning and making sure that everything there is as it should be in the interest of the community.
So, Steve Race, what policies are being put in place from the Labour government to help younger people with affordable housing?
Great, thank you. There's obviously a housing emergency across the country in many places, and for many people it's extraordinarily difficult to get onto the housing ladder, either to get a mortgage or to get into even afford sorts of private sector rents. And Labour Party completely understands this. The fact is we haven't built enough houses, and we haven't built the right houses, the right tenure as well. So over the course of a parliament, if the Labour Party does form a government, we want to build 1.5 million houses, including in a couple of new towns across the country. So more supply means that prices should either stabilise or come down. We also, as part of that, completely understand. So I grew up in a council house, so I think I didn't understand at the time what that stability was, how that stability gave my family real certainty over the course of our sort of lives. If you are living in private rented accommodation at the moment, you can be kicked out any time because it's through no-fault evictions. So if the landlord decides that you can probably get a better rent and you don't want to pay that rent, that landlord can get rid of you and then re-let it on the market to get a higher rent. That's incredibly damaging for families that just want to stay and live and get on with their lives and have stability, especially if they've got children, for example. So we're going to ban, in terms of private rental accommodation sector, we're going to ban no-fault evictions. We're going to have much higher standards across the rental sector as well. But it is really about that house building that will really unlock housing, more affordable housing for people. And that includes making council housing and social housing the second biggest tenure again. So we spend about £25 billion a year on housing benefit, which is essentially subsidising people to live in private rented accommodation. That money almost entirely goes into the pockets of private landlords. Those people who live in that accommodation would be much better off in something like social housing or council housing, which used to be about mixed communities. So I think I'll leave it there because you want me to stop, I think.
But I was just going to say, a lot of people in the audience will be thinking, where's that money going to be coming from? Where is it going to be coming from?
Yeah, so there's a difference, isn't there? So there's money that government can put in to build social and council housing, and we're absolutely going to put that money in. So that's why it isn't built at the moment. So Exeter City Council does build social and council housing where it can, and basically what it does is get the affordable element from new build developments, put it together where it needs to, and builds new council housing. But that can only really amount to sort of 60, 70, 80, 100 every couple of years. So it really just touches the surface. We've got about 500,000 people living in Exeter in temporary accommodation. So that's, potentially bed sits, potentially hotels, potentially, they don't have a long-term tenancy.
So we say Exeter or?
In Exeter, yeah.
What, 500,000?
No, 500 to 1,000.
Oh, sorry.
Families. 500 to 1,000 families. And there's about 4,500 people on the waiting list for a new kind of council home, for example. So the money comes from, there'll be private developments that do continue to build housing, and then government puts money into, through Homes England, which is the agency that looks after this, you can put more money through there into building social and council housing. But at the end of the day, housing is a huge economic boost. So when you build a house, It's not just the person building a house, but there's the people who make the windows, the people who install the windows, taps, gardens, all that kind of stuff. So housing is a real driver of the economy as well. What we also need to do is make sure that it's housing fit for the future. So we want to look at the sort of planning reform to make sure that we're not installing sort of gas boilers instead of sort of air source heat pumps and things like that to keep bills down for people who do move into those houses. So housing is a big problem. We're going to do a lot to fix it. It'll take a while. It's not going to sort of be fixed overnight. But that sort of housing supply and the right tenure in the right places is the right way to go.
Okay, Andrew, we're going to move over to you with this question about what policies are the Green Party putting in place for younger people and affordable housing, really.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Ollie, for your question. It's a really important question for young people. We do face a housing crisis and cost of living crisis, and one of the causes of our cost of living crisis is, of course, the cost of housing. So I suppose the most important measure that we would look at as the Green Party is rent controls. So we think that where the housing market is really overheated and rents are really, really high, that councils ought to have the powers to implement rent control, which would be based on a formula based on your income or the median income for a particular city, and that compared to the cost of rent. We also want to build lots of new council homes and social housing, 150,000 a year, and of course we want them to be built to the highest possible standard. I mean, to give Exeter Council credit, their passive house scheme is exemplary, but we would like to see many more of those kind of houses built, passive houses which are basically kind of net zero houses. We'd like to see many more of those built in the city. And unfortunately, Labour are really failing this city when it comes to housing. They had a target of building 35% affordable housing over the last 5 years. They've built just 19%. So they're actually failing to build affordable housing. And the housing that they're really pushing for is called co-living. You may have seen these big blocks of co-living. They are in favour of those, and they cost about £1,000 a month in rent. And they don't even meet basic space standards. They are basically shoeboxes that people are being forced to live in for £1,000 a month. And as Will pointed out, they're not being taken up anyway. People don't want to live in them, and certainly not for that sort of rent. So Labour are failing this city on housing. And the problem is they want to, at the moment, our planning system is a developer's charter. It's basically in the hands of the developers. They have all the powers to decide what houses they build and where they build them. And making planning laws even more liberal, which is what Labour want to do, is just going to make it even easier to put developers firmly in the driving seat, ready to bulldoze their way through our communities. So that is not the way to achieve affordable housing. The other area, I suppose, that's really, really important to reduce the costs of housing is insulation. And the Green Party is committed to a £29 billion street-by-street insulation programme led by councils, where we would see our leaky homes. We have the leakiest homes in Europe in this country. We need to insulate them to bring down energy bills and bring down our carbon emissions too. So that's another area in which we would really try and help people reduce the cost of living and the cost of housing. So I think those are some of our main points on housing.
Thank you very much. So we'll go to you, Matthew, really quickly, but we're running quite short on time,
Yeah, so simply as stated earlier, we're going to reduce demand by controlling immigration and increase the supply. That will bring house prices down through market forces. We're going to invest we'll look at new technology for building houses. There's some very good stuff on the continent, using those clay bricks with multiple air gaps inside and so on. There's a lot we can borrow from that. We can build them cheaper, we can build them more efficient, and we need to develop brownfield sites. And we're going to scrap Section 24 for landlords to allow them to claim their costs back as any of the business can.
Are you okay
more efficient.
Are you okay to say what Section 24 is to the audience?
Yeah, Section 24 basically means that the costs come off the gross rather than the net. Okay, so it means that landlords, like any of the business, can't claim back the expense of running their business, which obviously makes them less profitable. So they have to push the rent up to claw that money back. I believe this was done by, I forget who pushed this through now. I think it was the idea was to force landlords to sell their houses and put them onto the market to increase the supply. But it didn't do that, it just increased rents.
Okay, so we're going to go to one more question now on paper. So this question's from Poppy in the audience. So where does your party stand on increasing the minimum wage to a living wage? And if you support it, how can it be funded? So Steve, we'll go to you first for this one.
Great, thank you. Yes, we support the upgrading the national minimum wage and the national living wage, which is what the Tories brought in, but isn't actually the living wage, to a real living wage. We've got a problem where the wage has been stagnant for quite a long time now. So people's costs have gone up, so all your bills have gone up. Food costs of food shop has gone up by about £1,000 a year for the average family. Taxes have gone up in this government massively. We've got the highest tax burden in 70 years on people personally. And yet, also wages have become stagnant, and so wages haven't even kept up with those increased costs. So people are feeling it, right? So people are poor and getting poorer over the last few years. So what we need to do is make work pay. We need to make sure we have a more dynamic economy. We need to have a lot more growth into the economy as well. And I think the answer to this is that yes, we need to make work pay. We need to increase the minimum wage to a living wage, and we need to make sure that that's enforced with the Low Pay Commission to do that, which we will do. But also, we need to make sure that the UK is really investing in the industries of the future, and that's what the Green Prosperity Plan that Labour wants to bring in will achieve. So we want to invest in CCS, carbon capture and storage. We want to invest in GB Energy, which will quadruple offshore wind, trebles onshore solar, double onshore wind to make our bills cheaper. It will decouple us from the oil and gas sort of nations, which are really sort of quite unstable often. And so, all of these sort of manufacturing jobs, the installation jobs, all of these will be in the UK. So we really need to invest in these industries of the future to make sure that the jobs that you are going to be doing in a few years' time are here, and they're well paid, and you can make a living from them. And that's really what we want to see, a change in the economy. We want to decarbonise the economy, but grow the economy to decarbonise it. So there are more jobs, there is more payments in the system so that you can have a good life, right? Thank you.
Matthew, where does Reform UK stand on increasing the minimum wage to a living wage?
We want to reduce the prices that people pay for things. We're going to do that by scrapping net zero. September 2021, the wind died for a month. We imported electricity from France at £8,000 a megawatt hour. The cost of electricity went up 250% year ahead. I don't know if you recall that period, many energy firms went under because they were trapped to the cap on what they were paying. That increase in energy costs drives inflation. Our government mistakenly increases interest rates to control that inflation, but it's not cost pull inflation, it's cost push. If we reduce energy costs, everything gets cheaper. We are going to increase the tax threshold up to 20,000, which will put more money in people's pockets. And make things cheaper, reduce taxation, reduce inflation.
But where's the funding going to come from that?
Well, net zero doesn't. That's the problem with net zero is actually taking funding that's out of people's pockets. It's taking money from people's pockets.
What would you say to the audience who say stuff about, climate change? Do you not believe in climate change?
Well, so as I said earlier, the predicted impacts of CO2 and warming by the scientists will be subtle changes in certain areas. Many of those changes will be beneficial. Net zero is not a problem.
Andrew, you're from the Green Party. You want to bring net zero, you want it to come sooner rather than later. What do you respond to that about, one, scrapping net zero entirely, but also, increasing that minimum wage to a living wage?
Well, listen, Reform have net zero credibility when it comes to climate change. They really do. I mean, it's absolutely preposterous to suggest there's not a problem with climate change. I mean, this generation are the generation that's going to suffer under your policies. And it's also, I dare say that your policy of not caring about net zero is actually a racist policy, because the people who are most going to... The people who will most suffer from not tackling climate change are actually the poorest people in the world, and they tend to be of a different colour to you. So, it's a racist policy to say that we shouldn't be tackling climate change. And it's the lack of renewables that has caused the energy security crisis in this country, not too many renewables. I mean, what caused the energy price rise when Putin invaded Ukraine? It was the fact that we were so dependent on fossil fuels, not because we were dependent on renewables. If we had more renewables and our own energy security, we wouldn't have had that problem. But coming back to the question about the living wage and minimum wage, yes, absolutely. As I said in my introduction, the Green Party believes that we should increase the minimum wage to £15 an hour for everybody, starting at 16. And how would we pay for that? Well, one of the things we do, as I mentioned briefly, is we would introduce a wealth tax on those who earn more than 10 million, 1%, just 1% of their wealth, and for those earning over £1 billion, 2%. I don't think that's unreasonable to ask those people who are so wealthy to be paying a little bit more so that the rest of us can have a decent minimum wage. We would also, another policy which would drive up wages at the bottom end of the pay league, we would introduce a 10-to-1 pay ratio between the person in the top of an organisation and the person in the bottom. At the moment, we have something like a 200-to-1 pay ratio in this country in some organisations. If we reduce that to 10-to-1, the people at the top who would like to keep their salaries quite high would be forced to push up the wages at the bottom to maintain their 10-to-1 pay ratio. So that's another thing we could do to drive up wages.
Thank you. Will, we'll come to you very quickly as we are close on time, but what are the Liberal Democrats doing to increase the minimum living wage?
Sure. So, to answer the question, we would raise the minimum wage to the living wage. It's ridiculous that you could be expected to live on below a living wage. And Liberal Democrats also introduced massively increased the tax-free allowance in government, and I'm very supportive of increasing that to what living wage salary gets you. I think that would be really big for working people, poorest households, and our plans would benefit poorest households by about £600 a year. And it's largely paid for by businesses rather than government, the living wage. So there's not that concerned about paying for it in that respect, but I'll just answer about how we pay for our plans in general, which is that we'd make the largest companies pay their fair share. We'd reverse the Tories' tax cuts to big banks. We'd put a proper windfall tax on the super profits of oil and gas firms, and we would close capital gains tax loopholes so it more tallies with income tax.
Awesome, thank you. We're going to go to some live questions now. So, Jess Adams in the audience, could you put your hand up, please? So we'll bring a microphone over to you now, and you can ask your question.
Thank you. With local authorities outside London receiving significant budget cuts since 2010, how will each party address this in order to ensure that places like Exeter can thrive? Thank you.
Steve, would you like to go first on that one?
Sure, yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, when you look at the local councils around here, there are a lot of different parties that run different local councils. So the Conservatives run Devon County Council, which also covers Exeter, obviously. East Devon, I think, is run by the Liberal Democrats, and Exeter is run by Labour. So this isn't a party political point that all local authorities have been massively defunded over the last 14 years. And it was a really cynical, deliberate ploy to do that. So George Osborne and David Cameron, the first Tory coalition government, wanted to impose loads of cuts on the country. They thought the best way of doing that without getting the blame was to make local authorities do it for them. So they took away money from local authorities. So every single party, including the Tories at a local level, had to impose cuts because they're legally obliged to set balanced budgets, obviously. We've now got to, it's not just about money that's been taken away, it's also about powers and the ability to deliver for your local community. So much power has been taken away from local communities and basically crystallised and concentrated concentrated in Whitehall is absolutely sort of ludicrous to a certain extent, to the extent that the Prime Minister decided that he wanted local communities to have an outdoor chessboard, and local authorities had to bid for money to put an outside chessboard. £1,000 they got. It would have cost more to put the application in than just to do it themselves. So this absolute control of power and money at the centre is damaging local authorities, it's damaging local communities, and we want to reverse it. So we want to make sure that the local authorities get fair funding settlements in the future, and that we absolutely push back power away from central government back down to local authorities and local communities. And that includes, for example, the bus services. So in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher basically privatised the bus services across the country, apart from in London, which refused to allow them to be privatised. So they kept hold of their services, so TfL run the buses in London. As a result, bus ridership in London has continued to rise. Huge numbers of buses, completely reliable service. Compare and contrast to Devon and Exeter, and I know I've spoken to the college sort of principal previously about the problems that students will have coming in and meeting their sort of timings in terms of classes and getting home at night simply because the buses do not work. So what we want to do is push that power back, for example. So there's lots of other powers we want to push back down, but for the buses, we want to make sure that local authorities can control their bus routes again, can control the frequencies, can control the fares, and can run bus routes if they want. So local community bus routes, which is at the moment illegal because of Tory laws. So we can change that. We can push power, push funding back down to local authorities, because they are the people who know best what their communities need, and that's what we want to achieve with a Labour government.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll go to you now, Will, on that one.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. I'm actually going to say something that I think you don't hear politicians saying enough, and that's, I agree with everything you've just said there. So yeah, local authorities have been underfunded across the board, and Liberal Democrats fight for fair funding, for more funding. They are best placed to empower, we need to empower local councils to deliver on local priorities. As Steve said, they know their areas best and can enable their areas to thrive. So thank you for your question, it's a really important one. What I'd add is that there's also responsibility for the local council to make wise decisions and to have the approach that is open, collaborative, transparent, accountable, and open to scrutiny. And that is what Labour haven't been doing locally. And that's something that Lib Dems championed for change time and time again. And so that's been borne out in things like they've had 3 council-connected companies fold or require bailing out in the past 2 years. And that's on Exeter City Living, their housing company, effectively folded, owing millions. And that's on Exeter City Futures as well, which was aimed to address climate, and the other one is Exeter Science Park. So we very much need Liberal Democrat politicians to hold Labour better to account. Thanks.
Andrew, what's your response to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I also agree, actually, quite a lot of what Steve said. I don't always disagree with Labour. I think that the Tories have bankrupted local councils. There literally are many councils that are bankrupt because of the cuts from the Tories. We would invest £5 billion into councils, give them extra £5 billion in funding. The LGA recently published a report saying that there was a £6 billion funding gap for councils. So the £5 billion would just about cover that, not quite that, but that's what we're offering councils. And they really are, council funding is absolutely critical for delivering services to the community and for the green transition. I mentioned earlier that the street-by-street retrofitting of houses, the councils are going to be absolutely key to helping us make that transition to a net zero economy. I certainly agree with Steve about the buses. We definitely need to bring those back under council control so that they set the routes and the fares and the frequencies. We've got to remove that from private companies like Stagecoach. And we'd also like to increase local powers for councils. It's not just the funding, it's also about devolving power from central government to local authorities. That's absolutely vital. I think that's...
Yeah, we'll go over to Matthew quickly now as well. Thank you.
Okay, so UK debt's about 2.7 trillion currently. with interest rates of 5%. We're paying a lot of money to service that. Each taxpayer in Britain has about £80,000 of national debt on their shoulders. At 5%, that's £4,000 a year. It's £4,000 a year paid to bondholders, money that can't be paid into education, housing, NHS and so on. So we are going to take that money, put it into a long-term type war bond, which we did after the World War II, and pay a 2% on that. And we're going to liberate that tax money to be spent elsewhere in the economy. Okay, it's a bit technical, but it works. As the previous slur about CO2 being racist, yeah, as I said, we expect that, but it's not true. Anyway.
Thank you. We're going to go over to our next question. Holly Oliver in the, yeah, could you put your hand up, please? And we'll move the mic over to you. Yeah.
It is estimated that homelessness and rough sleeping has increased by around 75% since 2010. Why do you think this is, and what can we expect your party to do to address this?
If we go to Andrew now to answer that question, that would be great.
Yeah, indeed, homelessness is a scourge on our society, and particularly bad in Exeter, actually. We have a lot of homeless people in Exeter. It's a complicated issue. There are many reasons for homelessness. I mean, there is problems of drug addiction, problems of people coming out of prison, not having homes to go to. There's a big problem with veterans who've come out of the armed forces, not having homes to go to. Yeah, addiction problems. So we need to we need to make sure that there are those homes available for people, particularly affordable homes for people who are on the streets. And there's obviously some great organisations in Exeter supporting the homeless, and we need to give them sufficient funding and encouragement to continue to support people who are on the streets. So yeah, we need those, and it's not always about individual homes. It's actually sometimes about supported homes, because some people on the streets find it very difficult to live on their own. So we need to have supported housing as well, where people are supported off the streets and gradually encouraged and helped back into living independently in the community.
Thank you, Andrew. Steve.
Thanks very much, Holly. It's a really, really important question, and as referenced already, particularly important to Exeter, where we do see sort of a massive increase in homelessness over the last sort of 14 years. Listen, we know we can solve homelessness because we've done it before. If you look at the work of the last Labour government, Dame Louise Casey was basically commissioned by the last government to look into what we can do about homelessness. And over the course of about 8 or 9 years, we almost eradicated homelessness from across the country because we wanted to, because we cared about it. And I think that's the point about a government. A government can do a lot of things if it cares about it and wants to do something. And so what you saw was a massive, massive reduction of homelessness up until 2010. And then when the next government took over, it's gradually, and then pretty steeply gone up. The cost of living crisis has driven quite a lot of that as well. So you know, all families are struggling. If you're particularly rich, you know, you're sort of well off in Exeter, you're still feeling a bit of a squeeze. You've got a lot more to sort of cut maybe for your holidays and things. But then, you know, when you go down to the middle classes, you're feeling it as well. But then it goes down the chain. So you've now got a lot more people on the streets. You've got a lot more people who are couch surfing, sleeping in their cars. And then you've got a lot of people who are really on the edge, who can only afford to think about what they're going to put on the table the next day for their kids. And so, you know, we've got to change the cost of living as well. We've got to build those houses so we can get them back in. But we do also have to support. We know how to do it. So we know that there's a whole sort of government approach to this, but it's also in partnership with civil society. So I've been to see some of the transitional homes that the YMCA have, for example, in just off Sidwell Street, which are fantastic. You know, they get a bit of support, and you know, they get advice, and you can help people start rebuild their lives. And so we need a lot more of that. But we need, more than anything else, a government that wants to do it and cares about it. And we've got it in the manifesto. We've done it before. We've solved homelessness before, largely. We can do it again if we put our minds to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Matthew, what are Reform UK doing about homelessness?
Yeah, so in addition to increasing the supply of housing, the problem is costs, as we just heard. The cost of energy is driving everything. It's driving everything up. It's driving up inflation, it's driving interest rates, it's driving rents, it's driving house prices. But I do agree with what Ange said earlier, that many of the homeless people have mental health issues. And I remember the days of Thatcher. I remember the care in the community that she came out with, where she threw mentally ill people out of mental asylums onto the street. It was a terrible shame, and it's a disgrace that we did that. That's a personal view, not a party view. But I would like to see that rectified myself.
Okay, Will, what are your responses?
So this is an issue that's very close to my heart. Thank you for the question. I volunteer some Sundays at St Thomas Food Fight, which provides free lunch and drinks, no questions asked, on Cowick Street. And through that, your first-hand experience with people rough sleeping and, you know, at absolute rock bottom in society. And I'm thinking, what can we do to stop this as a problem? And I also ran for YMCA Exeter in the Great West Run this year, who do some fantastic work around homelessness prevention and support, mental health support as well. And I also ran for them because I don't believe that charities should have to pick up the buck. I believe homelessness is a government failure. So in addition to building 150,000 social homes a year, including council homes, we also need the funding in place from national government, related to the last question, so that local authorities in particular can actually continue to provide and increase their support for homelessness prevention and all that comes with it. So Devon County Council recently consulted on to axe their homelessness budget of £1.5 million, gone in its entirety. Luckily, thanks to a lot of consultation responses, including my own, we prevented that from happening, but it's postponed, it's still in the pipeline, it's still a threat. And that's going to increase costs for whole other areas of the economy as well. It's a complete false economy to think that cutting here will help us out, full stop. So, as Steve said, if it can be done, if the political will is there, and I intend to be that change.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to our next live question in the audience. So we're going to go to Dan Copper. So if Dan puts his hand up, and we'll bring the mic over to you now. Thank you.
What can be done to change the gap between academic achievement in private schools and state schools?
So, repeat that.
What can be done to change the gap in academic achievement in private schools and state schools?
I think first we should go to Labour, Steve Race, and if you just talk a bit about one of your manifestos.
Yeah, sure. First off, I'm a primary school governor in Exeter, so Willowbrook School over in Beacon Heath, which is one of our sort of, slightly poorer neighbourhoods. So I absolutely know that the impact of falling school funding over the last 14 years has had on schools. They are really struggling. Lots of teachers are sort of had quite a lot of burnout because they have to do everything. They've lost support in the classroom. The class sizes are bigger again. There's obviously a SEND crisis going on in Exeter and across Devon as well, where Devon County Council send special education needs services largely sort of stopped working for many children that want to access their EHCP And so, you know, the state school system is under real pressure. There are some good things about the state school system, and it's pretty, you know, some of the things that have happened over the last few years have been positive, but overall, schools are really struggling, and that's partly because everything else has gone. So you don't have sort of very good social care support for families anymore, you don't have Sure Start anymore, so a lot of the external support that families used to have is gone, and so it all falls onto schools. And so, yeah, absolutely, we, you know, I went to my local state school, as standard, I suppose, as do 93% of children growing up in the country. So what we're planning to do is a first step, so this is one of the first things we think we can do across the course of a year and a half, is get 6,500 extra teachers back into schools to make sure that those teachers are able to sort of teach classes and get a bit of extra support. We're paying for that by removing the tax break on VAT, the VAT tax break on private school places. So, you know, we think that basically that's an issue of fairness. Also, fees in private schools have gone up massively above inflation over the last sort of 10 to 20 years, and so there's definitely a sense that actually private schools can cut their cloth accordingly with this. They don't have to pass on that VAT rise to their students and their pupils if they don't want to. I would like them to look at their business models first, but it is a business, and so it should be paying the requisite tax, and we are hypothecating that across. Otherwise, breakfast clubs is really important that kids start the day off well, so every single school, primary school children will have a breakfast provided in primary schools as well. So, you know, there's lots more that we can do, but those are the two things that we want to get started with.
You just said you're a governor at a private school in Exeter.
Primary school.
Primary school, sorry.
You're not the first person, so I think I say it wrong.
Well, I was going to say, if there's parents who send their children to private schools and they're worried about this tax break, they may not be able to send their children to private schools. What would you say to them if Labour come in at the next government?
Yeah, definitely. So as I said before, I think you know, I'd like private schools to, you know, listen, a lot of children don't pay full fees anyway, so there's a lot of bursary support out there if you want to go to private school. Exeter School carries forward about £25 million every year as part of its business plan if you look at its company's house return. So, you know, there's money around. The private schools are not poor institutions. You know, they can, you know, I talk to some parents who send their kids to Exeter School, and they're, you know, they're pretty happy with it. They're sort of like, you know, actually, I want the private school, I want Exeter School to stop building lots of fancy new things when actually it's fine how it is. Or, you know, there's a lot of spending that I think private schools could look at. There's a lot of support that they could give to those pupils who who might find it particularly difficult to keep going. But also, the private school sort of in-house magazine for parents did a poll of its parents and said, you know, if Labour brings this policy in, how might you pay for the extra sort of VAT? And over 65% of them said with ready money. So, you know, this is really an issue of fairness, and private schools have had you know, a lot of money coming in. Perhaps they can cut their cloth a bit more accordingly, because state schools, 93% of our children go to state schools, they should have the best start in life as well. And it shouldn't be just because you can afford a good education that you get it. Everyone in this country, every child, every young person in this country deserves the best education we can possibly give them.
Thank you. We'll go to Reform UK for this question, please.
From personal experience, I think state schools are quite good actually. My daughter just came out a few years ago now, with some very good grades. They did an excellent job, extraordinary job. In terms of funding, and it obviously needs funding and increasing funding, you get more money. Again, restructuring our national debt will liberate taxpayers' money to fund this. So that's our policy.
Thank you, Andrew. We will come to you now.
Okay, well, I agree with Matthew that the state sector does a fantastic job. And I think you're attending a wonderful college. You're very lucky. So, I mean, this is really, thank you for your question, Dan. This is, sorry, is it Dan? Yes, Dan. This is really about levelling up. I wouldn't normally quote a Tory policy at you, but it's the imbalance between the private sector and the state sector. And it comes down to really the financial advantage that the private sector has. So we would, like Labour, we would impose VAT on school fees in the independent sector, We would also end their charitable status, because we don't believe that it's reasonable for independent schools to be termed as charities when they're really businesses. So we would end that. And I think that there are complex reasons why private schools do better than the state system. Partly it's because of some of the disadvantaged children obviously go into the state system, and they come from often very poor backgrounds where there's poverty, they have complex needs, and those obviously can bring down results. And there are various things that we would do to improve well-being in schools. So free school meals for all. We know that healthy meals are really important to both physical and mental health. And we would invest 8 billion in schools investment and a 2 billion pay uplift for teachers. So really important that we invest so that we bring up the state sector and we use some of the money from taxing the private sector to move that into the state sector. So it is about levelling up partly to even up this gap.
Thank you. Will, we'll come to you now, and we're a bit close to time, so we better move on soonish.
Cool. Yes, so it is a real problem. The most disadvantaged children are years behind in terms of education, like already from a very early age, from the age of 5, they're already like a year and a half behind, and that's ridiculous. So Lib Dems introduced the pupil premium in government, and that gave schools over at least £900 for every disadvantaged child that they had. And we'd also support reviewing it in the next government to ensure that it properly goes to the schools, to the pupils who need it. And we'd also increase per pupil funding every year above inflation. I don't believe in taxing education personally. I think it's the wrong approach, and as a party as well, whether it's universities, music lessons, or schools. But we do think that the charitable status should be reviewed so that it properly, the benefits that private schools receive in terms of finances is properly reflected in what they give back in terms of bursaries, for instance. And we'd also make taxes fairer. I think that's a really important way to bridge this gap. Unlike Labour, we would provide free primary school lunches, and we would scrap the 2-child benefit cap. That would make a huge difference to working people's lives.
Thank you. We'll move over to the next question now, and it's Isaac. If Isaac puts his hand up.
Hello. Recently across Devon, particularly in Brixham, there have been a number of pathogen outbreaks in the water supply, leaving water undrinkable. Combine this with constant dumping of raw sewage that makes our rivers and coasts dangerous to swim in, and a debt that has increased from £0 at the time of privatisation to £60.6 billion, all the while executives and shareholders continue to line their pockets, and it spells disaster. Will your party as a whole, or you personally, support a renationalisation of the water industry to clean up this mess?
Let's go to you, Matthew, from Reform for this one, please.
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yes, sir. As I said earlier, we will nationalise water.
How much would that cost the Reform Party?
Well, there's a Proceeds of Crime Act. You can take a criminal, and polluting the waterway is a crime.
Could you maybe explain that to the audience?
Because some of them might not know. So, profit from crime can be taken, can be seized by the government. If you've got a water company polluting the river, which is a crime, any dividend paid on that, any stocks and shares owned, that can be seized. Now, I'm not suggesting we do that, but it's a possibility. But there are things we can do. And that sends out a very strong message to water companies not to do so. So we have to fix this because it is disgusting.
So how will Reform UK find the people behind this then? How would they come across that?
Well, these companies exist, they are listed companies.
So you would do what?
Shut them down.
And bring it into national funded?
Yep, as it used to be.
Okay.
So with Thatcher's privatisation, the idea was that free market economics, when you've got competition, you automatically deliver a better service at a lower price. And that's great for things like mobile phones, but it doesn't work for roads, because you don't want 5 motorways coming to Devon. You choose the one that's the smoothest and cheapest. We don't have the duplication of water supply. We don't have the duplication of the train tracks. So the national infrastructure doesn't fit well with the privatisation model. And also the nationalised trains, by the way, as well. So again, another mistake that Thatcher made. And another reason why we are kind of right-wing, but also kind of quite centrist as well in our policies.
Okay, we'll go to Liberal Democrats now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. It's a really good, really important one. Lib Dems have a very strong action plan to end the sewage scandal, and it's been very much supported by organisations like the Rivers Trust, for instance. In terms of the specific question about nationalising water, I'd actually say no, because I think it doesn't necessarily put the right incentives in place. There's this idea that pre-1980s water companies were perfect, all nationalised services were wonderful and everything was rosy, but that's not the way it was. I can't remember it, but other people tell me. So what needs to happen is that the right incentives are in place to actually make it effective, to make the environmental choice, the choice that's best for consumers, the easiest for water companies. Yeah, we would make water companies public benefit companies. So that means that they would be forced by law to put environmental principles and consumers before their profits. And this has been endorsed by The Observer as well, the newspaper, this specific policy. And I think it's the one we need. Nationalising water in itself is not the golden bullet that you might think it is.
Andrew, can we go to you now quickly?
Okay, well, I'm loath to agree with Matthew, but it is our policy to take back water companies under public control. We think that 82 billion over the last however many years to shareholders is not a good use of money, and that money should have gone into fixing our water, our terrible antiquated water system and the filthy state of our rivers and coastline and waterways. So absolutely we would take it back under public control. It's quite a complicated process of actually doing that, I acknowledge that, but there are ways of doing it, and particularly stemming this leaking of money to shareholders and fat cat salaries for CEOs and water companies.
Steve, what are Labour doing about this?
Thank you very much, and thanks for the question. It's obviously really important in this area in particular, but it's really sort of brought to light the sort of state that the country's in, I think, after 14 years of Tory government. So I do agree with Will, though. Nationalisation isn't necessarily the answer, and I think politics is about priorities and it's about choices. So depending on where you look and who you listen to, it'll cost, in the region of between sort of 50 billion to 180 billion. I've seen one that was like 140 billion pounds. 140 billion pounds to nationalise the water companies. That money would be your taxpayers' money, it would be government money, and it would be paid to hedge funds, private equity firms that own these companies. If I were them, I'd be absolutely delighted to get paid for my company and walk away and not fix any of the problems that I've caused over the last 20, 30 years of owning those water companies. I think it's far better that we spend that money on other things and we make the water companies do what they're supposed to be doing. So they need to clean up their act. The Labour Party, I think I'm a European-style social democrats. I really believe in regulating quite hard and making sure that regulators have the teeth to sort out problems in the private sector. But we really need to. The Labour Party does have a great plan to sort of clean up the act of the water companies, including mandatory monitoring of all sewage outflows. We think we've worked with various civic society organisations, and we think that we can get sewage down by 95% over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. but also at the extremists, we want to bring criminal charges against water company executives. So that will be a real incentive for them to sort themselves out. But we really need to get the regulators sorted out as well, because there's three main regulators of the water companies, but in reality there's probably about 7. So that's clearly not working. It's clearly not working at the moment, so we need to fix it. But I don't believe that giving our money to hedge funds and private equity firms to let them walk away scot-free is the answer. They need to fix their problems, not the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So what we're going to do now is there's 3 more questions, and we're then going to go to live questions from the audience, but we're going to limit it to around a minute and a half per answer for these next 3. So we're going to go to Nelly for her question. So if Nelly puts her hand up.
In relation to the ongoing education financial crisis, what are your party's views and policies on tuition fees for higher education?
So if we go to you, Andrew, we've got about a minute or so for your answer.
Sorry, could I just be clear on my questions? Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question.
What are your party's views and policies on tuition fees for higher education?
On
higher education.
just on higher tuition fees, right? Okay. So the Green Party would the Green Party's policy on higher education is that we would scrap tuition fees and reintroduce a maintenance grant. So for people who go to higher education, it's a scandal that so many young people are in such severe debt. We don't think it's necessary. We think we can fund this through ways that I've already outlined. Raise the funds that can go towards scrapping that tuition fee and reintroducing maintenance grants.
Okay, awesome, thank you. We'll go to reform for this next answer, please.
When my nephew went to university, my sister had to get her equipment and fees was still £3,000 a year, which was £9,000. I personally think we should look at what the universities are doing and how they can justify that kind of increase. On the other hand, if someone is investing in their own career to earn more money, why shouldn't they pay for it, provided it's reasonable? Why should the taxpayer at large cover the cost of that? So there's some issues there, but we don't have a fixed policy on this one. The only fixed policy we do have is in relation to nursing staff and doctors. After 10 years in the job, we will scrap their college fees to encourage nurses and doctors to go into the profession and to keep them there.
Thank you. We go to the Liberal Democrats for this next one, then, please.
Sure, yeah, so obviously we've got to be very upfront about how we're going to cost things, how we're going to pay for things, and what is the best value for money. I believe tuition fees probably should be called a graduate tax instead, because it is only paid back on an income over, I think it's about 26 grand, and they are scrapped after 30 years, and the Conservatives have increased that to 40 years. We also introduced maintenance grants that were promptly scrapped when the Conservatives took the reins, and we would very much reintroduce those to help with the high costs of living, and that actually increased the number of people from disadvantaged backgrounds going to university. So yeah, I think, obviously we need to be very open and honest about this and how we're going to pay for everything.
And finally, Steve Rice.
Thanks very much. We've made the decision that we want to invest in early years because if you have already fallen behind by the age of 5, you're never going to catch that up. So early years is where we really want to put most of the new funding that goes in. So with 3,000 new nursery provision sites, a lot more childcare, fully funded childcare for early years. On tuition fees, we know that the system's not working, especially with the high interest rates since the student loan book was sold off. What we want to do, because I think it's fair, it's worth saying that the university sector is one of the sort of remaining sort of crown jewels of the UK, right? So including for foreign students who want to, international students who want to come here and study here, and the soft power of them going home and saying they had a fantastic time at Exeter University, they had a fantastic time elsewhere in the country, they bring their children here in the future and their families here, they always sort of enjoy their time here. So we really need to make sure that the university system continues to be a success story, and I feel like over the last couple of years it's one of the lasting campus institutions that the sort of governments sort of tried to undermine and sort of, make people not want to go to university. I want anyone who wants to go to university to go to it. But I think also we need to have parity of steam with technical education. So for those who don't want to go to university, we need to have really, really good, strong sort of apprenticeship offer, which we've got in our manifesto, and technical education. So we're not going to scrap tuition fees, but what we do want to do is review it with student bodies and with the universities to work out what a better system might be that's more sustainable for students in the future.
Thank you, that's your time on. We're going to go to the next question, which is Dan.
What can be done to address the reliability, overcapacity and cost of railway services?
Okay, so you've all got around a minute again, so Reform, would you like to go first again?
We don't have a policy on this one, other than to renationalise rail, at least in part. In fact, it already is nationalised. There was a private company called Failed, and it's now being run by the government more profitably than the private company ran it. So, yeah, I think we need to continue with that.
The Liberal Democrats.
So, thank you for your question. It's a really important one. I absolutely love rail travel. I've been interrailing 3 times. And I think we need a government that actually cares about rail. We don't have that at the moment. You've seen HS2 being scrapped, for instance. I think it should have started with the north and then, had money allowed, go south from Birmingham. And that would have actually addressed needs there. And we've got Eurostar service, for instance, which is now monopoly run, and there's whole big issues about how most effective to run railways, but essentially they need more investment and more regulation. And Liberal Democrats are also very vocal about ramping up electrification, and so that will actually improve air quality, reduce, it will improve running times and reduce noise and pollution as a whole.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Andrew Bell from the Green Party now, please.
Okay, well, anybody who's tried to get a train in the southwest will know just the problems that we face on our railways. It's one of the worst affected regions for reliability of anywhere in the country. And partly that is because, as a region, we've suffered from lack of investment compared to other regions. So we've done much, much worse than, for example, London and the southeast in terms of investment in the southwest. We would take back the railways under public control. We think that it's an absolutely failed experiment with privatisation. We would invest 10 billion in public subsidy into the railways, and that would bring down fares. It would help with electrification, new trains, new routes, new lines, and something that could be really beneficial for Exeter is the idea of the Devon Metro, and indeed for lots of students I know who travel in from outside Exeter. Exeter has 10 stations. It's ideally placed for a metro style system, so a sort of turn up and go system, which would be like a tram, but would run on the existing rail. But you'd have to expand some of the, double the track, for example, in some places. But it's ideally placed for that, to really get people out of their cars and onto a light rail system. And the 10 billion of subsidy would be, that would be an ideal candidate for a chunk of that money.
Okay, we are just approaching the time there. We'll go to Steve for that question, please.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. The Labour Party will be renationalising, bring them all back into public control. This is different to the water companies because the water companies are absolutely private organisations, and you would have to pay them to bring it back in. Trains are run on a franchise system, so an organisation gets to, like GWR gets to run it for a certain period of time. They get paid and pay. It's a very weird combination because actually they get a huge amount of subsidy to deliver a failing service. So as those contracts end, we bring them back in and we reintegrate it across the country. So you have one single train network with one single management structure. You reintegrate it with the rail infrastructure as well into one company to make sure that it is all integrated. I don't drive, so I cycle, use the bus, use the trains all the time. My bike is by far the most regular in terms of I know where it is and it turns up when I want it to, unlike the trains and the buses. So we do need to make sure if we want people to use cars less, which we should, we need to really crack this nut of getting public transport back up and running to make it reliable, efficient and affordable for people.
Okay, and finally we've got one last question from Fontessa.
No, I think that's it. That's like the set question.
Oh no, I've got one more question here. Does Fontessa want to ask a question?
With much of arts funding rapidly falling, many state primary and secondary schools not being able to afford creative subjects such as like art or dance or textiles or music, how will your party ensure that these opportunities stay open to us?
Okay, Labour, Steve Bruce, do you want to go first?
Fantastic, absolutely. I think we've had over the last few years a real denigration of humanities, arts, culture, sort of training, education, and the general sort of ecosystem of this country by this government. There's a real focus on STEM, which is absolutely very important, but actually the cultural and heritage industries add 125 billion GVA to our economy. They're huge for us, and the soft power that comes with it is absolutely incredible around the world. We are known to be one of the most creative sort of nations on earth. When you look at music, you look at film, you look at all the rest of it. So there's absolutely, we need to defend it, protect it, and help it to grow. And there's things that we can do, including get music back into schools to make sure that people get the music service going again, because so many children now don't have the opportunity to pick up an instrument, never mind learn one. So I think partly it's about getting rid of this notion of Mickey Mouse degrees and all that kind of stuff, because it's just not true. We need to make sure that we respect it and we sort of grow it and we nurture it, because it's one of our biggest sort of selling points as a country. So absolutely agree with the question. I think there's a lot we can do. Thank you. We'll go to Reform for this question, please.
Yes, it's very important. I'm a musician myself. It's a fantastically creative thing to do, and my daughter's a great artist. It needs funding, but that's the big question: where does the funding come from? It comes from taxpayers' money. Decisions have to be made. One of the big ways we can save money is in 2008 when the central bank issued quantitative easing and gave a lot of money, printed it basically, to the high street banks to stabilise them, to give them as much money. That money was redeposited with the Bank of England directly as an emergency reserve. The Bank of England is paying interest on that. It's paying interest at 5% to the banks on money it gave them. And that's your tax money, our tax money. Well, the only country that does this is about 50 billion a year. We're going to stop that. These are actual, it's in our contract, we're going to do this. The guys running the party are very, very clever people that fund this money. We know about this kind of thing. And that's what money's going to come from, the fund this kind of stuff.
Thank you. We'll go to the Lib Dems now.
Cool. Yeah, I agree with what Steve said in particular. Essentially, there's a lack of care for arts subjects, arts degrees from the government, and a lack of funding as a result. And that's the key problem. Lib Dems very much believe that these things are very valuable to society and to individuals, and we will champion that in political circles.
And Andrew, finally.
Yeah, thank you, Zeta. We would agree with a lot of the comments that have been said already. The Green Party is very, very committed to including arts and vocational subjects being treated equally with the other subjects, so we definitely want to push that side of things. I've already said that 8 billion investment in schools would be what we're looking to, as well as 2 billion pay uplift for teachers. So that hopefully would help recruit the teachers that are needed for those sectors and give a boost to those sectors, because it's really vital that they are treated equally with the more standard subjects.
Thank you, Andrew. So we have enough time for, I think, 1 or 2 live questions from the audience. I saw that hand over there go up very quickly. So if we go over to you, but I think if we direct a question at a party, then we can just keep moving from there. Oh yeah, that's fine then.
Okay.
As Palestine has not yet been mentioned today, I would like to say that in 2022 alone, £42 million worth of arms were sold and exported to Israel. If you were elected, would you vote against future funding and licensing for war crimes? And how would your party help aid those affected by the war?
Who would you like to answer that question first?
Reform, please.
We don't have an official policy on Israel. It's not a British problem. It's not a problem we can fix. It's a problem that goes back, thousands of years. As you know, in the 30s, Britain ran Palestine, and we knew what a difficult situation it was. So the 1948 vote on the partition of Palestine and the creation of Israel, we actually abstained from that. And we've generally been neutral on Israel ever since. That seems to have changed recently, and as much as we can condemn Hamas, I think, myself personally, it's not a party statement, by the way, I can also condemn the settlers of the West Bank and the theft of Arab land. It's terrible. I do think there should be the ultimate accord, the two-state system should be followed, and I think they should leave the West Bank. But again, that's a personal view, not a party view, so don't hold us to that.
Green Party, Andrew Bell, what's your answer to that?
The Green Party were the first party to call for an immediate bilateral ceasefire way back in October last year. We condemned the appalling murder of hundreds of Israeli civilians by Hamas, but we've been utterly appalled by the action by the Israelis since. Completely disproportionate. It's collective punishment, and we know that largely children and women have been the main culprits from that. Over 35,000 killed. That is not a reasonable response from Israel. So we would immediately end all arms exports licenses to Israel. We would cease all military collaboration with Israel, including the use of British bases by Israeli forces. And we'd want to see Netanyahu and his cronies prosecuted for war crimes. It is a disgrace what he has done in Gaza, and we want as to Britain having no power, it's nonsense. They are on the Security Council. They could vote for a ceasefire. They could stop arms exports. To say that Britain can't do anything, they have been complicit in the murder of children and women in Gaza.
That's not what I said. I said we abstained to the 48 vote because we knew it was a nightmare.
Steve Roseslaber.
Yeah, thank you. So the Labour Party's gone for an immediate ceasefire. It was a Labour motion that went through in Parliament, that got through in Parliament, calling for an immediate ceasefire after a bit of sort of politicking, which I think really should be taken out of this issue, because what is happening in Gaza is absolutely appalling. What did happen on October the 7th is appalling as well. We do need to see the hostages returned, including some that are still British citizens as well, so we need to bear that in mind as we discuss this topic. But what is happening in Gaza is absolutely appalling. So the Labour Party, immediate ceasefire, bilateral ceasefire. We are calling for the reinstatement of aid through WRA, so UNRWA, which is the UN organisation that delivers aid into Gaza, which is currently cut from the UK government funding. We're supporting the ICC and the ICJ procedures. It's absolutely right that we play a role in making sure that those international organisations that we signed up to have the space to do their job about whether questions around genocide, for example. And then in terms of settlers in the West Bank, we support travel bans and sanctions against them. More importantly, actually, is statehood for the Palestinians, and so that shouldn't be an outcome of a peace process, but as part of the peace process before you get to an outcome. So statehood for the Palestinians is in the Labour manifesto. We'll be supporting that as a Labour government if we're elected after July the 4th. Thank you.
And Will Axel now.
Thank you for the question. I'm glad you've raised it, because I was fully expecting it to come up, and I think it's a really important I don't know how to describe it. Issue, huge humanitarian disaster. I agree in particular with what Andrew has said. What I would add is that Steve mentioned the votes in Parliament about Labour voting it in. That was a horrendous day for Parliament. Very it did not reflect well because of how much the SNP, Labour and the Conservatives, I would say, were all playing politics with the issue with people's lives. What Lib Dems did in Parliament that day was vote for anything that got us closer to a ceasefire. That is the kind of political leadership that we need. And sending those, standing up to America, for instance, to get them, we have power, we have the power, and we should be using it as much as we can, regardless of however much power we have. So we've recognised Palestinian statehood immediately. We would end arms sales with Israel, and we've been calling for an immediate bilateral ceasefire for over 6 months. And I wrote to Ben Bradshaw back in November ahead of the vote then, and that he shamefully abstained on that vote. So we Lib Dems always stand up for international justice, humanitarianism and rights.
May I just ask each candidate to put their hand up if in a few weeks' time there was something that said a ceasefire, and you were elected as an MP, would you go for that ceasefire or would you not go for that ceasefire?
Immediately.
Okay, so we're going to go to another live question, so people put their hand up. We'll go to this side. Honey, if we go to this person here, if that's, no, this one here please, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I am a member of the LGBT community myself, and something that I'm quite appalled by is the Conservatives trying to reverse the ban on conversion therapy, and that it hasn't got through is quite disgraceful. So I would ask, if you were elected, would you recognise conversion therapy as a form of abuse and ban it immediately?
We need to keep this short, but if we go this way to this way, that would be great.
Yeah, so thank you for your question. It's really important. The Lib Dems are the only party to have it in their manifesto to end conversion therapy, and that's for everyone, all LGBT plus people. So I think it is torture, it's horrendous, and I'm very concerned about the narratives coming out of the Conservatives and Labour over essentially Section 28 for trans people in schools. I think that's really disgusting, and Lib Dems were the ones I know it was part of the Labour government, but it was actually Ed Davey himself who proposed the scrapping of Section 28.
If we go to Labour now, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure where Will's got that from, because we have a series of specific policies for the trans community in particular, so including a trans-inclusive conversion therapy ban, which we voted for, and the Tories keep sort of failing on it despite the fact they promised it, because they are intent on driving wedges between communities, some sort of culture war, which I'm thankful it appears to be failing, because it's all they had. So it's a good thing that we can commit to that if we form a government, but also we're going further, so reform of the Gender Recognition Act to make it easier to transition. We want to make transphobia an aggravated hate crime. We want to include trans-inclusive SRE in schools, and then importantly the expansion of gender services, particularly for younger people across the country as well. So we're absolutely committed to supporting the LGBT community in its entirety as a Labour government. So thanks for the question.
Josh, I just wonder, because we are mindful of time, as I know you are, if we just take perhaps, I'll just come and take 3 statements so that the candidates can hear people's voices, because it's really clear from the number of you putting your hands up that you do want to have your opportunity to be heard, and unfortunately we haven't got time to hear all those questions. So perhaps if I just quickly go around to three or five people, at least the candidates can hear your concerns, and there might be some time to catch up with them perhaps afterwards. But I'm also mindful we've got lessons, etc. to go to. So if I could have hands again on different issues, and we'll just try and raise a few of these. I go 1, 2, 3 to start with.
Climate change is a really pressing issue, and I feel like you guys aren't necessarily taking it into consideration enough. For example, the Labour government had a £28 billion pledge to invest in green energy, which they've gone back on. And I feel like that's a bit of a letdown of the community, and I feel, and also reform, you say that climate change is something which you're just going to have to let happen. You can't build up a wall between climate change, because it's very powerful. can't build up a flood wall when there's crop failure and there's people dying. You know, it's such a pressing issue and we need to focus on it. You can't just...
Thank you.
When the question of Gaza was brought up, the word immediate ceasefire was mentioned by 3 of the 4 parties. But how is that going to be achieved? Because realistically, while I don't remember who mentioned it, but someone said the UK is on the Security Council, so is the United States, who do continue to veto every single vote. So while you can say you want an immediate ceasefire, you need a strategy to get that, because the UK isn't the most powerful country in the world, and there are other countries who will be willing to stop that if they try to get it.
So I just want to start by saying thank you for coming here. I think Exeter students are really glad to have this opportunity. But I had 3 letters for you, which is the NHS. And within our perspective on the NHS, we see the downward spiral of our workers, of our staff, and of people experiencing care from the NHS. But I also want to bring you to the perspective of the eyes of people who come from other countries to work for the NHS. We have people coming from places like Nigeria, Ghana, the Philippines, where they do exams to come into the NHS and to help for years. They come in and they are told that they have 2-3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, to find different housing, and then they are told that the money that they were promised will be given after, promotion and things like that. People are coming here to help with the NHS for opportunity, but actually are not given what they are promised. So I want to know, in your plans to reform, dare I say, the NHS, and to bring it back to how we are told that it used to be, where is the promise to the people coming in to help with the NHS and improve its quality?
Okay, so we'll get one more statement, then each candidate will have 60 seconds to 90 seconds for their closing statement.
The Devon and Torbay Combined Authority would have given Torbay nearly 8 times as much representation than what Exeter would have got. How in government would you get a better deal for decision making to be made closer to the city and representational of the people of Exeter?
Thank you. So what we'll do now is we'll go to each party and their closing statement, and if the candidates want to stay around and answer any more questions, they can do if they like. So if we start with you, Will, with your closing statement.
There's no microphone anyway.
I have got this one if it's easier.
Thank you. Right. So thank you for your questions. You raised really important points on Gaza. I think the political leadership here is absolutely key. If we don't try, then we won't succeed anything. And I think so much needs to be done to rescue our NHS. We need humanity in our approach to immigration, and there's so much investment that needs to happen. We've got a very ambitious plan. We put it front and centre in our manifesto, including for free personal care and emergency funding to tackle ambulance response times. On to my closing statement. So as a Lib Dem, I aim to enable, to empower everyone to be themselves, to fulfil their potential and thrive. Every vote for me and the Lib Dems is a vote that pushes the likely incoming Labour government to be more liberal, progressive and transformative. The Conservatives cannot win here. There's no risk of them winning. They're far behind last time, far more unpopular this time, and they have 0 Exeter City Councils in the Exeter constituency. So, as some tactical voting websites say, vote with your heart in Exeter. Vote, and I'd say, vote for a fair deal. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Will Axel from the Liberal Democrats. Steve Race with your closing statement, please.
Great, thanks a lot for everyone for coming and all your fantastic questions. I think it's been a really great session and actually a bit more lively than most of them have done as well. So thanks for taking your time. Listen, this is an election where we can actually change the country. So this is about what do we want for the city of Exeter going forward, what do we want for the the country going forward. This is a real opportunity to turn the corner, to start rebuilding our public services, start growing our economy, investing in our economy, to properly combat climate change, because climate change is baked into the Labour Party's plans for growth in this country, and we in Exeter have fantastic potential to participate in that. So I want to make Exeter the place you want to come if you're starting up or scaling up a climate change, blue tech, green tech business, because we've got such a fantastic depth of experience here. So I can be, I think I want to be the Labour MP hopefully within a Labour government, which will be a real recipe for success for Exeter. We've got huge potential, we've got a lot of challenges, and we've been held back by the current government. We can fix some of the problems around homelessness that we've got here, around housing, but we really need a Labour government to do that. So thank you all again for your time. I'll hang around after this if anyone's got any questions, come and join me. But also, please do vote if you're able to. Vote next time when you are first able to. And also join a political party, because democracy runs on political parties. No matter which one you choose, please do get involved, because we need people like you, who are articulate, bright and smart, to get involved and to help shape what the political parties think and what they do. So thanks again. Cheers.
That was Steve Race from the Labour Party there. So Andrew Bell, your closing statement, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much for all your questions. It's been a fantastic session. The Tories are toast, we know that. We all expect a Labour government on July the 5th, most likely with a large majority. But we need a group of Green MPs to help make Labour government bolder. And in Exeter, the only contender to Labour is the Green Party. Greens are on the up in Exeter. In recent local elections, we came strong second in the city, and we now have 7 hard-working Green councillors. And this is Exhibit A. This is the result of the local elections. You can see that the only challenger to Labour in the city is the Greens. So wouldn't it be great if we had Green representation in Parliament? Somebody who'll stand up for the city, stand up for action on climate and the environment, stand up to help those who've been ground down by years of cruel austerity policies. The more MPs and votes the Green Party gets, the greater the influence we will have over a Labour government. So on the 4th of July, I'm standing for real hope and real change, for a fairer, greener future for our city and country. If you can vote, I urge you to vote Green.
Thank you. That was Andrew Bell from the Green Party. So we'll go to Reform's closing statement.
Well, you won't be voting for me, because I'm not standing, of course. I wish I had time to give you a full presentation on climate change, the data, the science.
I don't think they want to hear it.
It's a very, very, very interesting topic. But understand, it's become almost a quasi-religion, and to question its heresy. Yeah, that's not what I'm going to say really. As a party, we have very, very, very good policies. They make good financial sense. And they're fairly centrist as well. There's a lot to like about our policies.
They don't even have a manifesto.
We don't. It's called the contract with the people, because we take that seriously.
Thank you, Matthew, for that closing statement. And can I just give a big thank you to everyone coming to attend this event. It's been amazing. The turnout's been incredible. So can we just have a round of applause for everyone in the audience, please? Youth engagement is vital, and I'm proud to be a part of an event like this today. And one thing everyone needs to remember, the general election is in a week's time today. So please make sure you vote. And if you can't vote, encourage your friends, your family, 18-year-olds to go to the polling stations, turn out, and we need to get the numbers up of the amount of younger people who go to the polling stations. I'm Josh Tate, I've been your host, and a massive thank you to Alfie, Honey, Lee, Matthew and Billy for letting this happen, and I just hope this has encouraged you more into politics, and hopefully you can go back to your parents if you're not old enough and tell them please vote at the next general election, which is a week's time today. Thank you very much, everyone.
Very good.